Hello everybody and welcome back. Today I wanted to do a video that I thought would be good for the beginning of summer, and that is a recommendation list for some science fiction and fantasy palette cleansers. So I have done a palette cleanser video in the past, and I will link that one below in case you're new to the channel, in which case welcome, and you haven't had a chance to check that out, because I think that the spirit of this video is to give you some book selections to read in those summer months where you might be busy with activities and work and trying to get away for the weekend, or occupy your kids who are home from school, or find ways to fill the time. And I know that I like having some of those quicker reads to put in between the big fantasy series. When I was a university student, summer was a very relaxing time. Now that I am not a university student anymore, summer can be very busy between, as I said, shuttling the kids back and forth to activities, working, trying to bring them to the pool, to the beach, to the, whatever they want to get up to keep them occupied during the time that I'm not at work. So I think I like to have some of those quick and snappy books that I can get through to help break up the TBR and make it feel like I'm not reading the same book for days and days and days on end. So as I said, I will link the non-science fiction fantasy palette cleanser TBR below. And today I will give you some science fiction and fantasy selections that I think would make particularly good books to read to break up some of those bigger series this summer. So the first book that I want to recommend is a very old book, but a very good book, and that is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it feels a little bit silly sometimes to recommend books like this one, because I feel like they're books that everybody has read. But sometimes, and I know this is true for me, you can't read everything. And sometimes it's nice to know if the classics that everybody, says are must-read novels, if the people whose videos you watch, and if you find that your tastes align with theirs, if they actually enjoyed those books, because there have been many a classic that I have not enjoyed, while there have been others that I have really, really liked. So The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a definite yes from me. This book is so short, and mine is from a secondhand bookstore, so it actually has somebody else's name in the pages, but it's so tiny, it's so quick to read, and it is delightfully quirky and charming. It's kind of hard to give a summary for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because not because I don't remember it really well, but because I think that from the very first page, there's so much to discover that will just land so much it will have so much impact if you don't know what it's about when you go in. So my recommendation would be, if you like science fiction, if you like quirky, funny books, then you should definitely pick up The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you enjoy it, there are other entries in the series, but this can very much be read as a standalone. This blends, it has that mixture of funny, irreverent, philosophical, it's misleading in its humor, because it does explore a lot of important topics, and it just hits that blend of science fiction, kind of highbrow science fiction that I like. It's silly, but that Douglas Adams knows that it's silly, and that he knows what is important. I understand if this is your first video on the channel, this sounds like the most incomprehensible garble that I have ever said, but I really don't want to give away too much about the book. I just think if you haven't picked this one up, I think it is a science fiction classic that is very much worth your time. It's really funny. It's a great book to read by the pool, on the beach. It takes almost no time to get through, and I don't think that you will be sorry that you read it. For the next one, I will go on to a book that I actually read this month, so it will come up on my June wrap-up whenever I'm able to get that out, and that is Firestarter by Stephen King. So this is a book that I picked up. I wanted to read it as one of my 5-star predictions. So I'm not going to tell you exactly my exact feelings on it, but I will tell you a little bit about it, and I'm recommending in this video, so I obviously really liked it. But I and a longtime fan of Stephen King, and I have read almost all of his books that I would classify as more speculative fiction or fantasy instead of outright horror. This is one of the last ones that I hadn't read that I think, because I don't think this book really can be classified as horror. It's more a dystopian slash science fiction thriller, and it focuses on a young girl named Charlie and her dad, Andy, as they are on the run from a government organization. So Andy, the main character's dad, was involved in some experimentation when he was in university. The government was trying to see if they could induce psychic powers in individuals, and he got married to another person who was involved in this study, and together they had a child, and that child begins to develop some very interesting powers. And what the book follows is Charlie and her dad, Andy, as they are on the run from this government organization who is trying to hunt them down and take this little girl in for experimentation, essentially. And I really, really enjoyed it. It is a very, it's a little bit chunkier than it seems initially, but I thought that it read very quickly. It was a very breezy read in the way that thrillers can be. And of all I have talked a lot about being someone who likes a variety of genres, but the thriller genre is one that I actually do struggle with quite a bit, because I often find that because of that fast pacing and that need to get through the story, the authors don't spend a lot of time on character development, and that's what I really enjoy in a book. So the thrillers that I have enjoyed have been ones that focus more on the characters, and you get that element of the book built up a little bit more. And I think, as with all of the things that Stephen King writes, I think that he does build up these characters quite well. You understand their motivations. You even can start to empathize with some of the villains of the story. All of his characters are just very three-dimensional. So I think that it adds that little bit extra that boosts it up above the typical thriller for me. I will say that I struggled a little bit. The main character in this book, Charlie, the little girl, is the exact same age as my daughter. So I found some parts really difficult to read, and this is a book that if I had read it as a teenager, when I read the bulk of my Stephen King, that would not have fazed me in the least. But as a mom who has a child the same age as this character, I found some parts of the book, like, I was really emotionally invested and was almost scared to keep reading because I didn't want to know what was going to happen next. So if you also find that post having children, things tend to hit you a little bit differently, then that was definitely the case for me in this book. But still, a fantastic read, a great palate cleanser, I think. Next, I'm going to bring up an author that I have spoken about quite often, but I don't think that I have talked about this particular book before, and that is Neil Gaiman. So I have said many times on the channel, I love Neil Gaiman. He is one of my favorite authors. He is an auto-buy author for me, so if he releases something new, I will pick it up right away. But my favorite stuff by him, my favorite of his novels, are actually his bind-ups of his short fiction. So this one is called Fragile Things, and this has some of my favorite short stories by him in it. So I like Neil Gaiman for lots of reasons. He has beautiful writing. His writing is exquisite. He has an amazing imagination. He is able to set a tone, to create an atmosphere better than almost any other fantasy writer I have read. I think that he is a very versatile author, as I've spoken of before. He writes excellent children's fiction, young adult fiction, comic books, nonfiction, you name it. His blog is entertaining. Like, anything that he writes is entertaining to read. But I really love his short stories because I do find, and he has talked about this before on his blog and in interviews, that his plotting process is very haphazard. It's kind of, I'm going to figure out this story as I write it. He is not a strict plotter. And I think sometimes that can show in his longer fiction. There is some meandering in some of his longer books, and I think that that's probably just part of his process. I still really like his novels. I tend to find the shorter they are, the more I like them a lot of the time. But I haven't read a bad book by him yet. But his short fiction is just next level. And I know that short stories are not for everyone, but I think the type of short stories that Neil Gaiman writes showcase his talents so well. He creates such a sense of place, and he gives you such imaginative ideas in such a small package that if you were going to check out any fantasy selection of short stories, this would be the one that I would recommend. And I'm just going to make sure, because he lists all of them in the front, like in the contents, the table of contents. But yes, so the story Sunbird, which I believe he wrote for his daughter. So another cool thing about his short story collections is that he actually gives like a little summary of where his headspace was when he wrote the story, who he wrote it for, how it came into being. And as someone who really likes to know about her favorite authors, I really like that. That's a part of these books that I really enjoy. But the short story Sunbird, which if I remember correctly, he wrote for one of his children, is one of my favorite short stories. I think the first time that I read it, I thought it was so cool. His stories, they jump from super creepy to sweet and everything in between. So I really do think there would be something for everyone. But I am a Neil Gaiman short story fanatic. So I think if you were going to pick up anything that you could throw in your bag and read a bit at a time this summer, I think that this short story collection would be a great place to start, for sure. The last novel that I'm going to talk about on this list is one that was released this year. So it's a 2021 release. And I've talked about it a little bit, I think, in a wrap up. And it was not my favorite release of the year. It was actually a book that I ended up being a little bit disappointed in because I had really high hopes for it, but it was still very beautifully written and still very easy to flip through. I think I read it in one sitting, maybe two if I had to take a little break. But that is the book 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, which, first of all, the cover is so beautiful. Ever since I saw it, when it first came out, I was blown away by the cover. I think it's so, so pretty. But this is it's not a retelling. It's kind of a behind the scenes of some of the characters from the Iliad and the Odyssey. And it's all the female perspective. So what Natalie Haynes wanted to do in this book, and she talks about this in her introduction or her afterward, I can't remember which one, but she wanted to talk about the untold stories. And a lot of these characters, if you have read the Iliad or the Odyssey, if you're well versed in Greek mythology, you're not really going to learn anything new from these characters. And I think that is where I struggled a little bit. So what I was expecting when I went into this book was to get something akin to The Song of Achilles or Circe by Madeline Miller, where she took characters that I knew about, but she twisted them on their heads. She reframed the telling without changing the essence of the character or changing the events of the stories. She gave us a new perspective on those characters, which I really appreciated. What this book did was more shine a spotlight. It highlighted some of those female characters who play small to medium-sized roles in those histories, but she really lets us know about how the Trojan War impacted them, what role they had to play, what role there was to play outside of just being a warrior. And it was unfortunately a little bit of a miss for me because I had just been hoping for something different. But as I said, the writing was very nice. If you don't know a lot about Greek mythology, I think this would be a great place to start. This gives you a rundown of a ton of the female characters from the myths. And if you just enjoy beautiful writing and you want something that you can pick up and read in a day, then I still very much do recommend this book. So definitely an easy one to sit like by the side of the pool and flip through with other things going on. It's not something that draws a ton of your concentration. And I think that for a lot of people, this will be a book that they really enjoy. I think this was very much a me problem and not a problem in terms of the writing or execution of the book. It was just more of an expectation issue on my part. But those are all of the novels that I wanted to talk about. I decided to go ahead and pick a graphic novel to mix into here because I have been wanting to read more graphic novels this year. I used to read a lot of comic books, graphic novels. I used to be really up on what was being released, and there were a couple of runs that I would buy from consistently. And I just got out of that habit. It was a combination of them being expensive. Graphic novels are expensive, and it's just hard to keep up on everything. You kind of sacrifice some things for others, as anybody who has tried to deal with their monumental TBR knows. But I am hoping to mix some graphic novel recommendations into my videos because I have read a lot of really great stuff, and I hope to continue to read a lot of really great stuff. But this is, and I'm sorry to repeat an author twice in the same video, but one graphic novel I found really fun was Marvel 1602 by Neil Gaiman. So most people who are comic book fans know Neil Gaiman because of his Sandman series, which is also fantastic. But it is a 10-volume series and not really what I think about when I think of a palate cleanser, because it has a lot to explore and unpack in its own right. It is a very imaginative, deep graphic novel series. I would hope to talk about it maybe in the future on the channel. I really enjoy it, but I wanted to highlight Marvel 1602 today because this is one of Neil Gaiman's superhero comics. So he has written, I think he's written for DC and Marvel actually, and I really enjoyed this one. So this would be for people who are, at least I would say, like moderate fans of the Marvel comic book universe, because you're not given a lot of setup in terms of characters in this. This is more of, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. Like, it says Marvel 1602. This is a story about all your favorite Marvel characters set in 1602. It has some fantasy elements. It draws from the comic book lore and manipulates that in some interesting ways, but it's a standalone graphic novel, which is rare, especially in terms of superhero comics, and Neil Gaiman wrote it, so it's great. And if you like the Marvel Comics universe, you'll see a lot of the characters that you really like. Some of the big names from X-Men. I really don't want to give away who's in it, because part of the fun part is discovering which characters are in it and what side, if we want to call things sides, they're on, because the characters are kind of tweaked a little bit in this graphic novel, but I had a really good time reading it and just seeing where some of my favorite characters popped up, how Neil Gaiman envisioned them in this comic book. But this is a great, like, I'm going to pick up and read in one sitting graphic novel. The art is really nice. I want to not give anything away, but I'm trying to flip to a page that looks unassuming, which is difficult. This one doesn't look too bad, but the artwork is really pretty. And yeah, I really like Neil Gaiman's writing in comics as well. I think that he's a great author in terms of writing graphic novels as well. And I think that that one is a really fun one that I don't hear a lot of people talk about. I don't know. I guess I just picked it up because I was buying everything on Neil Gaiman's bibliography, but I had a really good time reading it, and I think that it would make for a lovely palate cleanser to read this summer. It's not like sunshiny and happy, so this is maybe not the best, like, you know, books I recommend for summer. It's more about the ability to pick something up and set aside some of those heavier books, something that you know is going to be easy to flip through, something that's not going to weigh down your mind, that's going to feel refreshing perhaps after starting a long series or being in the middle of a long series. But those are all of the recommendations that I have for those palate cleanser type books. If you have read any of them, please let me know. If you're looking forward to maybe giving any of them a shot, then let me know, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye.